What is project-based learning? What does project-based learning look like in high school English class? If that's a question you want to know the answer to, you are on the right episode, and we are going to be doing a PBL showcase where we interview Kendra, who is in fact a teacher in a high school English class, and she's rocking project-based learning. She has such a great interview. You're going to love this. If you're just getting into PBL, you might need some additional resources. You're going to want to go to whatispbl.com. When you go to whatispbl.com, whether you're a teacher or an administrator, you're going to get resources that you can use immediately. When you go to whatispbl.com, you fill out a form that says administrator or teacher, and the resources come directly to you, differentiated for your needs. Now, if you're a principal and you want the teacher resources, put in teacher. You'll get the teacher resources. That's fine. Share them. We think they're going to help. You can find those at whatispbl.com. Today, we have such a great interview with Kendra, and this is what we try to bring you. We're trying to bring you project-based learning from the trenches. If you're looking for the ivory tower PBL, this isn't the right place. We've covered the research around PBL. We're not afraid of that. It's there. It works. But what we bring you is what works in classrooms, day in and day out. Classrooms just like yours, schools just like yours. And we bring you the educators that are doing the work in the classroom right now. And this interview is no different. Now, Kendra's going to talk about PBL in an English high school classroom. And if you're an English teacher listening, because hopefully somebody shared this with you, because you're going to love this, but she covers nonfiction text. And after Kendra and I got off of the interview, we were kind of talking off air, and she's like, a lot of teachers are going to want to know about fictional text. That comes up a lot, like literature, what do we do with that? How does it fit into PBL? So she actually wrote a blog about it. So in the show notes, we're actually going to have Kendra's blog where she is going to talk about literature in the high school PBL classroom. So she's going to break that down. But the interview today is going to be around a really cool topic. It is nonfiction, it's persuasive writing. So she has the standards-based pieces. And then the work that her learners do, outside of the classroom, is just phenomenal. The voice and choice that she gives, I love it. So I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. And again, if you know of an English teacher in high school that's thinking about PBL, this is the episode to share. Or maybe the blog. Again, that link's in the show notes. Enjoy. Okay, PBL Simplified audience, welcome to another PBL Showcase. It's that second Wednesday of the month where we bring you a PBL unit from the classroom. And we bring in the teacher that's running that PBL unit. So today we've got Kendra from Lowell, Indiana, my old stomping grounds. This is where I went to high school. So it's good times. Kendra, really glad to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Hey, what do you want to talk to us about? Give us a little bit of a background, and then I'll start poking. We'll take different rabbit trails. And actually, we have to take our first rabbit trail because I have to ask you what your why is for education. That's always the first question. So what's your why?
Yeah. So I don't think that I can really get into my why without getting into the story of how I decided to become a teacher, which is less a decision and more this kind of light bulb moment from a question I was asked. So when I was in high school, I had the same English teacher for 3 years, this wonderful force of a woman, Dr. Hudson. She had her doctorate in Russian and English comparative literature, and then she's teaching high school English. But she taught PBL, and one of the things that we were asked to do, just kind of as an introductory thing into a PBL unit, was to think about what it was that we wanted to do as a career. And I told her I couldn't think of anything. There were just too many options that I thought I would have fun doing. And so she just started kind of asking me some questions, and she was like, well, what do you like doing now? And I said, I really like tutoring students. I was tutoring elementary kids at that point because I like that light bulb moment. And I loved when students were frustrated with something and I could help them finally get to that point. And she said, well, why don't you become a teacher? And it was like this, oh my God, why hadn't I considered that? So for a long time, I think my why was helping students get to that light bulb moment. And as I've continued in my career, so this is year 13, I think my why is way more tied to the whole student, and it's more about supporting students not only academically but also emotionally, and giving students that authentic connection, and knowing that the adults in their life care, and giving them that person.
Yeah. I mean, there's a ton of research behind that shows that that's a good idea, right? For learning, right? Like, so what about standardized test scores? Right. Kids need to know that they have adults in their lives that love them. Like, right, that's where we start. So I love that your why comes from a teacher challenge, right? That maybe should have been obvious to you, but wasn't. Like, that's what we do as educators, right? We bring up the obvious just in case you can't tell, and then inspire. So good. Let's jump into your PBL unit. Give us a little bit of background. What grade level are you teaching? What's your subject area? And then we'll just kind of jump in.
Yeah. So I teach high school English, and I teach a lot of different levels, grade-wise and ability-wise. And this is a project with my honors sophomore students. And it is a project where we partner with our town council. And it started as a need to teach persuasive techniques, modes of persuasion, get our students ready for the AP tracks that they're going to be embarking on as juniors and seniors, but a want to get our students much more civically engaged.
Good. So I heard you use a bunch of standards-based language, and you said AP, right? We've been through the research that PBL and AP is a good idea, but so like you're warming them up for that, right? And then, but then there's also like above and beyond those standards, right? Like standards is like the standards should be the low bar, right? And then what do we really want to get to? We want to get civic-minded students. So keep us going.
Yeah. So as I was thinking about like, how do we get students more civically engaged? When they think government, they think like capital G, federal, state level governments, and they really don't think about local governments. So what I wanted to do was work with our town council and our town manager and get our students to start seeing that they can be a voice in our town and our community, and see that they can actually help to solve problems that exist within our community. And it's really easy for us as people to see negatives, and sometimes it's harder for us to take that next step and see the potential solutions. And so this project is partnering with our town council, that town manager, in order to identify problems within the community that are student passions and get them to build solutions that can then be presented to the council. So as an entry event, we started off just with a brainstorming session, and we threw out all of the things that we thought were problems within our community. Like, what are the things that we know as a town, or because we are a more rural school district and we have some surrounding areas as well, but in that school district area, what are the problems that we notice? And we ranked our top 3 like individually, and that was how we grouped our students, was by those interest levels, to make sure that we did have that buy-in and that engagement right from the get-go. And with those groups of 3 to 4 people, we might have multiple groups tackling the same problem if we had a lot of interest in one. But I told my students, like, it's okay if we're all, not all, but if more than one group is just looking at the same problem, because your solutions are going to end up being different. And that just gives us more opportunities to see how we can actually address these issues. So our culminating products are persuasive papers that are written individually, and then group presentations that are sent to the appropriate stakeholders. And in the past, that was only the town council, but this past year, my current sophomores had some great ideas and asked if they could reach out a little more. And so we had some things that went to state legislature as well. So they were recorded presentations. We didn't have anyone in the room with us when the presentations were done, but students also learned how to write professional emails in order to send those video files and papers to their stakeholders, who'd been briefed ahead of time that these things were coming down.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a ton of great things to unpack. One, I love that your entry event, like an entry event, you don't have to freak out about it, right? Like, you're trying to tell your students, like, this is what's going to be happening, and I want you to be super engaged. So here it is, right? So sometimes I think we overcomplicate that, which is a real problem, because that's step 1, right? So sometimes we know that participants can wait and procrastinate on the entry event. And it's like, don't do that. Like, get the first step, and then the second step, and then the third step. It sounds like your learners were like, yeah, town council is cool, but I think I'd like to have a broader reach. Did that just come from them organically?
It did. It did. Well, some of it came from students who felt like there were some things within our curriculum, especially our health curriculum, that needed to be addressed. And we had to talk about how the town council couldn't help with that they're not, the correct governing body. And so we talked about what the school board's abilities were and what administration at the building and the district level's abilities were. And then we talked about the laws that exist in, through the state legislature and how those are really what tie us to what we can and can't teach. And so that was the point where they said, well, can we send this to them? And so we looked up who are our state senators and representatives and how do we actually reach them with this information?
Well, I think it's a great lesson for kids just to know, like, it's not that easy, right? It's not like, okay, at the end of 4 weeks, your whole issue's wrapped up. Like, it's not how the real world works. Like, the real world is you talk to the wrong person, then you talk to the next wrong person, then you talk to 3 more wrong people to get to the right people, right? But you continually learn. And now, like, what a great process for them to leave high school with, I think. Like, just one, the perseverance, but two, like, they actually know kind of the right people to talk to. So they're looking for problems, but not to complain about them, right? They're looking for problems to find solutions. Like, again, just another great mindset that kids can leave with. Do you have a student story or a story that you can share of this PBL unit where maybe it's that light bulb moment you were talking about at the very beginning, or some special sauce that came out of this?
Yeah. So this particular group, because I've done this project a couple of times before, and it's very much stayed within town council, and we've gone through a cost benefit analysis, and our solutions have, all of the costs that are needed. But a lot of times those were just estimates based on what they could find on Amazon when it came to materials, and then they estimated labor. But this group, I really encouraged them to reach out to adults in, various capacities in order to help them with all of these steps. And so we had just almost a tagging out process of going where there was cell phone signal to make phone calls to businesses to get quotes for materials or quotes for labor. And the best thing that happened was my student Elle. She struggles sometimes. She doesn't always have the ability to put her full effort into her work. There's just been a lot of stuff going on in her life. And one of those things that was a negative was an experience that she'd had with police officers. And her group was concerned with pedestrian safety in the town. We've got a lot of areas that don't have great sidewalks. About a decade ago, we actually lost a student in an accident with a skateboard where he was skateboarding and he was struck by a car. And so their group decided that they needed to interview a police officer about the issues in our town with regard to safety and pedestrians. And so they called the police chief, and the police chief said, I can send an officer to the school right now. They got their MacBooks out and they were ready to record this interview. They had questions lined up already. And so Elle, who'd had this negative experience, actually interviewed the officer that had been part of that experience. And she was very professional, and they were able to have this awesome conversation. And those snippets of video made it into their presentation. And it was just a really affirming moment for me as an educator that PBL is this wonderful opportunity for students, and that they can make these great leaps, not only academically, but also socially and emotionally.
Gosh, that's so good, Kendra. We're gonna have to make that like a super clip that we put everywhere, because it's funny though, like, that's not in your project planning form, right?
Oh no.
I think there's no way that you knew that outcome was coming, right? But just trusting the process, that if we put our kids in authentic situations where they're solving real world problems, that they're interacting with adults in real ways, that they grow, right? They grow and they become better people. Like, what a neat experience that's not in a standard, right? If you went just by your standards, then there's no way she would have had that interaction.
No, absolutely not. And I was so proud of them when they came up to me, because first they asked, can we call the police department and see if it would be possible to interview someone? And I'm thinking, well, someone will, they'll give a few comments over the phone. They'll record it with another phone. It's not a big deal. And they come up to me and their eyes are just huge, like dinner plates. I'm like, McPheeters, they're sending a police officer to the school. We're going to interview him. We might need a pass. This might go past our class period. Okay, I will take care of everything.
Yeah. How
awesome.
Yeah, that's so good. I mean, I think we also forget, and we've probably maybe somebody's had a negative experience, but the community wants to help us in education. They just don't know how, right? Like, police officer can't show up and just say, hey, I'm here to help. It's like, we need to reach out. Like, PBL is such a great vehicle for community partners to fit into. So it's like, hey, police officers, can you come and answer questions? Like, yeah, we'd love to do that. Like, how cool is that? What a neat story. I love that.
Yeah, it was amazing.
And your learners were excited at school, right? Like about school things, right? Like, let's just take a quick moment to realize that that's neat, right? Like, especially it sounds like the learners that you're kind of describing, maybe school isn't always an exciting, event for her. And outside of, gosh, I just love the idea of these relationships that are being repaired through project-based learning, right? Again, like, you can't draw it up, but we know enough that it happens again and again that our learners are growing in ways, yes, standards-based. Yes, they wrote, and maybe we'll talk about this, and I'd like to talk about this in just a second, like a rigorous paper, right, was written here, like standards-based.
Yes.
And, like, that's the low bar. And
right.
all this other work that they did.
Oh, absolutely. And, and at first they're looking at me like I have three heads, when I'm like, okay, so, and you're going to have to calculate all of the costs and what your materials are going to be. If you're, having something that is physically being created, what are the labor costs? If you need someone who is hired and is going to be a part of the town, or if we're bringing in businesses and need buildings renovated, whatever it was, you've got to be able to tell this town council or whatever governing body what the numbers are, because they need to hear that. And my students are like, this is English class. Yes.
That's so good. That's so good. But this is what we do in the real world, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
In the real world, you don't get to work on the memo or the email and then suddenly switch to billing for the next hour, right? Like, it's all intermingled. That's so good. So can you talk to us about, because English and PBL, it's like, I get like PBL should be in science because you're doing laboratories and all these different, these experiments and that kind of thing. But PBL and English, how do you work a paper into this? What's that look like?
Oh, PBL and English for me is the ultimate place to do PBL. And for me, it was so freeing. Like I said, when I was a junior in high school trying to come up with my career for the rest of my life, there were so many things that I wanted to do. And PBL and English lets me just give life to all of those interests that my students have and that I have. And English is really just the vehicle for it. So when it comes to those papers, it's really looking at what are those authentic pieces of writing that are necessary to achieve these projects. So like with this project, students were writing persuasive papers and they're learning the modes of persuasion. They're learning ethos, pathos, logos. We're watching video clips of commercials that are using those and identifying which one's which, so we have a good understanding of that. And we're looking at it in short nonfiction texts and short persuasive texts. And as we're doing that, we're talking about which of these will actually persuade governing bodies.
Mm-hmm. There it is.
Well, we can use those emotional appeals, but at the end of the day, the people who are responsible for all of the constituents don't really care about those emotions. They have to be more objective. It's part of their job. And so we talk about how you need to be able to build your credibility. We need to use ethos in that way, and you need to be able to use logic and reasoning. Mm-hmm. And so suddenly those silly Greek terms, they don't sound like real words to the students. They understand the application of them.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so we're able to take those ideas and put them into a paper where they can see that there is impact that is a possibility when they're writing a persuasive paper, asking for these governing officials to take into consideration that the problem that they see is a legitimate problem and that the solution that they have found is a plausible solution to this problem.
Yeah, I love that you described a workshop or a portion of a unit that any English teacher in the country could be doing in high school, right? But your learners got the added bonus of context and a reason to apply it.
Yeah.
Not just memorize it and regurgitate it. Like they were going through possibly, again, like some of the same workshops, like some of the same process a traditional teacher's doing, right? But they've got a reason that they're going to apply it and a place to apply it.
Yeah. And it gives the learning, in my opinion, a lot more meaning when students can then not just cram to memorize for a quiz,
right?
And it's a skill that they see has ripples that they can take with them.
Yeah, it's so good. Because there's some surface knowledge that's happening there. There's some deeper knowledge, and then there's some things that they're going to transfer, right? Like you're hitting all of those, and they should all be in there, right? Like that's how those levels kind of work. They need to be in tandem. They all need to be there. It's not one or the other. But sometimes we don't get to the deeper in the transfer. So yeah, and then your learners start to get used to that, right? Like there's sometimes there's a little bit of pushback. Like, hey, wait a minute, we're doing math and language arts, but then after a while, is that just what happens in McPheeters class?
Yeah. I think, this is the project that we start the school year off with.
Okay.
And so it's a great way to get students that buy-in right off the bat because there's so much voice that students get in this project. And so by the end of it, I think, I always tell them, like, give it 3 weeks, you'll be used to my crazy.
Right.
And that's how we start the year. Is just give it 3 weeks. You'll be used to me. But it really helps set the tone for the fact that even though this is English class, that there's going to be a lot more than English that happens here.
Yeah, that's right. So good. And our learners are used to that, right? Like they know that from first period to second period to third period, there's a little bit different, nuance to that class. And they rise or fall to that, right? If you're going to say, hey, I just have to do matching words, or put the highlighted words in the blank, I'll do that and I'll move on, right?
Yeah.
But if you challenge them, like you are, to say, hey, like we're going to do this well-rounded piece, like you're going to have to, like you need to make sure that your numbers actually add up. That's one of my favorite things about giving kids a budget. It's like, right? They're like, well, this costs $1,000, this costs $2,000, so we need $14,000. Wait a minute, right? And they'll put it into a PowerPoint, right? Until they get to their practice presentation, it's like, they can't take you seriously if your numbers don't add up. It's just such a great lesson. I love it. So, Kendra, I'm asking this question. Well, before I do that, is there any last thing that you want to give our listener about just maybe even PBL in general? Like, but as you are walking through this PBL unit and reflection, like what are some of your favorite parts that have come out of this as a PBL teacher?
Oh, so I definitely have favorite parts that came out of this year, especially just because of the amount of buy-in that I had just right off the bat and how these students really just wanted to rise to, doing things well, not just finishing the unit to finish the unit, not just creating the product to create the product, but really wanting it to be something that could be implemented. And they were constantly coming to ask me questions, and could I ask the town manager, or could they email the town manager? And really just wanting to check their work throughout the process, which I loved. And then there were also, I don't know, should I get into the moments of maybe what I would change to, or?
Yeah, I think so, right? Because we don't hide on this podcast that everything's perfect, right? So we're in a constant mode of reflection and revision. So yeah, what are some things that you would maybe change?
So I love starting the year with this, but I did not consider when we started this year that it was an election year. So suddenly we're in September of an election year, and I'm going, oh my God, I don't want to send these right now. I don't want us to send these right now, because if I do, and these people are going out of office, there's no reason for them to do anything with them. And so this year, the project became a little disjointed because we did our project in the fall, and we got our presentations filmed, and we wrote our papers. And then the elections happened 2 months later. And then we waited for people to actually take office in January. And so it was only really recently that we actually sent those materials, which it felt super disjointed. And we had all of this momentum through the filming of the culminating products and filming those presentations. I say film like we still use film recording, but I'm showing my.
Well, I think it's a great example, right? That things aren't perfect. And yes, you can have some perennial PBL units, right? You can do it year after year, but you also need to think through that, right? Like sometimes it's not the best thing, right? So, but you learn. Right?
I did.
Your kids were still engaged, right? They still asked questions and still were, revising their work. I heard you say that, like they're revising it so it's better and better. Like I know that our listeners are like, I'd like that. I'd like that. I'd like that. Right. So yeah, you had the engagement. And then it's okay to just say, hey kids, I might've messed up. Right.
And it really was that moment where it's like, guys, we can set this right now, but here's what I'm realizing.
Yeah. But they get it, don't they?
Yeah. And it was fine, and they struggled a little bit going back to their papers and looking back through them to make sure they really were polished and ready to send, because it had just been so much time. Yeah. And so I love this project. This is one of the projects that I do want to continue year after year, because there are always going to be things that students see as needs for improvement in our town. And I do want all of our students to be able to get involved in local government and start being more civically minded. But I do think that when we get to an election year, I need to perhaps consider the order of my units.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And instead, just shuffle some things around.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, thank you for kind of openly, vulnerably sharing that. And it's important, right? We need to be open with our learners that things aren't perfect. And I think the transparency is helpful. I love that you're tackling like the problem solution piece for kids, like to figure that out. I can't figure out how to get it to start with a C, so it can be like the 4 C's or, but ultimately, like that is like almost the employability skill, I think, right? Like if you go to a business, right? If you can go into business and you can find a problem and you bring a solution to your boss, like you are winning, right? Like you are winning right off the bat. Like that's who we want to hire.
Oh, absolutely. I really think that this project in particular, I really saw growth in how my students were able to see problems as obstacles to overcome instead of just barriers.
Yeah. See, that's that perseverance piece. What a gift to your kids. That again is not a standards. It's not in your standards to teach perseverance, right? So, but it might be one of the most important things that you can teach your students. So do you teach through the standards? Yes, absolutely. Are you looking at mastery of that? Yes, absolutely. And then you're going like well above that, right? Like to the really important stuff. It's through the standards that we're teaching those employability skills. So, all right. Can I ask you my wrap-up question?
Absolutely.
You ready?
Mm-hmm.
So our big goal at Magnify Learning, we know it's not just us. It's going to take a whole bunch of people, but we want 51% of students to be graduating from a PBL school by 2051. So 51 by 51. So Kendra, what would the world look like if we had the majority of our kids graduating from a PBL environment?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think if I can, I'd love to speak to that as someone who was also a student of PBL.
Ah, good. Yeah.
So for me, PBL opened so many doors. Doc Hudson, who just to, come full circle, was the one that got me thinking about becoming a teacher. In her English class, we renovated our town's train station because it had been voted the worst in the nation in 2003. And it was really bad. But in that renovation, she set up a box lunch with Amtrak's board of directors in Chicago. We took the train up from our train station that we had just helped fix and met with them. We attended a high-speed rail conference in Indianapolis. And we all learned that adults would listen to us and that we did have a voice. And so for me, more students being involved in PBL means that we have more empowered young adults going into the world. And so it doesn't matter if they're going on to college or going straight into the workforce, they have all of these skills that are going to help them to be more successful. I think it also helps us to get a more civically engaged population that doesn't see politics and local government and looking at like how things function in our country, that we stop having people that say, well, that doesn't affect me, or I don't need to be involved in that. And instead, they see that they do have a voice and that they do matter within that process. And then finally, I think that PBL really allows us to see different perspectives and to look at, the world as a whole in a way that we just can't do within a classroom teaching traditionally. And so we end up with a more empathetic student body as well. And that then follows into the real world.
Yeah. Excellent. Like, just exclamation point at the end of that. I don't even think it could be a period, right? And Kendra, you are obviously a great part of that. You're PBL certified, you're doing the work, and your learners are moving towards that future, and they are part of that empowered workforce or heading to college. Wherever they go, they're bringing that mindset of, I see a problem, I come up with a solution. They're bringing perseverance, and that's a game changer. There's more light bulb moments and more opportunities at the end of that. That's so good. So thank you for that, and thank you for being on the podcast today. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. PBL Simplified audience, you just got another PBL showcase. If you've got an English teacher friend, or maybe one of your staff members is an English teacher and they're like, well, I don't know how to do PBL in English. Like, this is the episode you need to share, right? Like, you heard a ton of voice and choice. You heard it's okay to do math in English class. So share this broadly. It's a great way, like, share the passion that you heard, share the student stories that are in this episode, because that's how we get more people on board. That's how we get more people to take the next step. And as you do that, you will engage your learners, tackle boredom, and transform your classrooms. So go lead inspired. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the PBL Simplified Podcast. I appreciate you. I'm honored that you tune in each week. Would you please take 2 minutes to leave a rating and a review? When you leave a review, it lets the next person know that this is a podcast worth listening to. When they go into their player and search project-based learning and PBL Simplified popped up, when they see those reviews, they know that high-quality visionary leaders are listening, so they tune in too, and they can find their way into the PBL journey. Thank you so much for leaving a review. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you.